and our marking of the 20th anniversary of the attacks of 9/11/2001. I'd like to thank those who helped put this together. I'm going to unmask while I'm speaking up here, and all speakers are welcome to unmask while they're up here. Norma Lowry, Director of the Community Center, thank you. Bruce Frosh, Senior Pastor of the church. Larry Lipton, who is videoing this event, and that'll be available online after the event as well. Joel Blagg, who assisted with the facility and the live streaming. Joel is up there. Thank you, Joel. Spring Interfaith Council, who is out there accepting email addresses to be on their mailing list. Nasir Malik, thank you very much. All right, I said I was going to be able to pronounce this correctly. I'm going to give it a shot. Khwaja Azimuddin, how did I do? Thank you for your assistance in this. Harris County Barbara Bush Library is out here in the lobby. Clark Boyd, who put together our awesome program here. And of course, all the speakers today. Sadly, Rabbi Shaul Osachi will not be with us today. His wife took a bad fall yesterday, and he is with her in the hospital. The world changed on September 11th, 2001. Here in the United States, we lost a sense of security that we will most likely never regain. We lost some of our innocence, much like people experienced on the day Pearl Harbor was attacked. We also saw a backlash against an entire community that some saw as jointly responsible for the attacks. For others, seeing an entire community of faith being unjustly persecuted for the attacks. We saw it as an opportunity or even a responsibility to reach out and express our concern and offer assistance where needed to ensure their safety and promote peaceful interfaith relations. This event is a result of that sense of community and a belief that only light can defeat darkness. We witnessed acts of horror on that day, but we also saw amazing acts of bravery and compassion. Many people died on those airplanes and in those buildings and on the ground, and we will mourn them today. But we will also celebrate the human spirit that caused first responders to rush into danger, selflessly helping others without hesitation. We will celebrate the coming together of a nation in the immediate aftermath that saw all sorts of acts of compassion. Crime rates declined, divorce rates declined, but sadly there was also an increase in hate crimes. There was a lot of anger as well as sadness in those days, and to some extent it is still with us today. Let us be the light that shines in the face of darkness. Not long after 9/11, Imam Faisal Abdul Rauf wanted to build a community center near Ground Zero. While it was intended as an extension of an olive branch to bring healing to the community, for some it was a slap in the face of those who perished as well as their families. I saw it as a missed opportunity to bring together the interfaith community in peace, to promote a lasting peace. So I am very glad to see that we here in Spring, Texas, are not missing this opportunity to do just that. We of the Abrahamic faiths all worship the same God, and we are all children of that God. While we approach it in different ways, we are all looking for the same thing: to be free to worship our higher power as we see fit in a community that embraces each other's right to do just that. The Sanskrit word namaste expresses that desire perfectly. And the best definition of that word, I feel, is the divine in me blesses and honors the divine in you. So let us begin our celebration with our first speaker. Gregory Hahn, Interfaith Engagement since 9/11, Perils and Promise. Drawing upon 7 years at Interfaith Ministries, Reverend Hahn will explore the current state of interfaith engagement and discuss possibilities for the future. Since moving to Houston in 1998, Greg has worked at the intersection of religion, education, and dialogue. After a year as a hospital chaplain, Greg served St. Philip Presbyterian Church for 4 years and Atascocita Presbyterian Church for 3 years. He then taught courses in the study of religion and ethics, as well as English literature. For for 6 years at St. John's School. He has also taught at the university level in the Honors College at the University of Houston. Since the summer of 2014, he has served as the Director of Interfaith Relations and Education at Interfaith Ministries for Greater Houston, where he works closely with diverse faith communities to further IMGH's mission of dialogue, collaboration, and service. He holds degrees from Georgetown University and Harvard Divinity School. Gregory Hahn.
Thank you for this opportunity and for the opportunity to see new friends and see longstanding friends as well. Hope my brief comments, and I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes, can perhaps help to frame our hour together. On September 11th, 2001, and listen to this very dated sentence, I was a 30-year-old associate pastor watching the towers fall, and I watched it on a 40-pound rabbit-eared television we wheeled into the office area on a media cart. That is a very dated sentence. Perhaps the clearest example, I think, of the changes we have all experienced over the past 20 years. Fast forward 20 years, and so much more than just interfaith relations has changed. In fact, when you really think about it, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the changes we've experienced over the last 20 months. So I want to be mindful of the time, so I want to summarize the perils and promises in 4 areas. Number 1, the perils of information and the promises of wisdom. In 2001, I think Islam was pretty much an unknown in most of the American consciousness, and in many ways it still is. Suddenly, we were all scrambling to figure out what Islam was and to varying degrees of success. Books for the general population on Islam were getting pumped out as quickly as possible. People made a lot of money and notoriety on the speaking circuits. More inclusive people were reading whatever they could find, but there wasn't much good stuff out there, and there was a lot of inaccurate nonsense that was getting pumped out quickly. It was a true battle of information and ideas, and it still is. We need to, more than ever, draw deep from wells of wisdom to interpret the sea of information in which we find ourselves. And what we have found is that our various religious and spiritual and ethical traditions have a lot in common, and a lot that's different. And that's not a bad thing. Let me shoehorn in here that we need to resist a bland sameness in interfaith work. Our differences are just as important, or perhaps even more important, than our similarities. And the fact that we are making unique truth claims should not be overlooked. We need to be reading 2 of my favorites, Houston Smith's The World Religion and Stephen Prothero's God Is Not One, hand in hand. Perils and promise number 2. The perils of hubris and the promises of humility. I'd like to say that we have made progress on our understandings of religion and our engagements with interfaith dialogue, that we can be proud of ourselves, that an event such as this one can be organized with a lot of work, of course. But the people are out there and the interest is there as well. And much of this success is due to the 10+ years of hard work at the thankless volunteer grassroots level. It takes time to build relationships, and then time to build trusting relationships, and then trusting productive relationships. In my 7 years at Interfaith Ministries, I reside at an unusual nexus of working for an interfaith organization. So professionally, I don't ever represent a religion, but I'm also an ordained Christian minister. From my vantage point, I see what's going on at that more 30,000-foot level, and there are organized regional interfaith groups in Spring, the Woodlands, Ombalatascasita, West Houston, and Clear Lake. There are interfaith talks, interfaith days of service, interfaith Thanksgiving celebrations. There's much to celebrate, but there's also much to do. There are, more than calling them slip-ups, places where we have to grow. And more, we don't even know that's happening. While there are still blatant acts of bias and bigotry, particularly towards the Muslim community, the more subtle ways of how well-meaning people still scapegoat other religions, those need to be kept in mind as well. Describing a legal ruling, as I've seen over and over in social media, as Sharia law in Texas, or Texanistan, or the Texas Taliban, abdicates intellectual rigor and once again throws Islam under the bus. Let me reiterate in what I think is a diverse crowd. This isn't a political statement, but more how even and especially people who consider themselves interfaith friendly unwittingly use the tropes and canards that they have been fighting against for the past 20 years. We need to remain vigilant of our own well-meaningness, as it is often far more dangerous than the mendacity of the bigoted and the biased. Interfaith work is a humbling enterprise. That I can attest, doing it full-time for 7 years. There is always something to learn. Number 3, the perils of xenophobia and the promises of community. Yes, 9/11 put a focus on Muslim-Christian relations in particular, and between the construct of the West and the not West. But 9/11 is also a time to reflect on who else is my neighbor. The Sikh community came into clear focus after the 2012 mass shooting in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. But it needs to be remembered that one of the first hate crimes committed after 9/11 was not against a Muslim, but was against a Sikh. It was at the Mesa Star Chevron on September 15th, 2001, and his name was Balbir Singh Sodhi. What we can learn from 9/11 is not just about Islam, but what we've learned is about the othering of people overall, and the promises of what Martin Luther King has often called the beloved community. Our region has significant numbers of people of all faiths, and also the multiplicity of faiths within faiths. And what we can learn from 9/11 that can move us, and what can we learn from 9/11 that can move us beyond interfaith relations, but also to recognize our othering of people based on race, or sexual orientation, or gender and gender identity. 9/11 can be instructive not just when it comes to faith relations, but when it comes to what we need to do to build community among all people. And finally, the perils of complacency and the promises of innovation. Now is not the time to rest on our proverbial interfaith laurels, though let me say it is time always to rest and take Sabbath. This is the Sabbath between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the first Shabbat of the new year. So those who are here from the Jewish community, I say thank you for taking the time. These are also known as the days of awe or the days of repentance, days marked for prayer and rest and time set apart. We live in exhausting times, that is for sure. But we need to look from what we have learned over 20 years to what can be. For the latter part of the 20th century, interfaith dialogue used a word like tolerance. And that was a good word to use. It got interfaith dialogue along the way. But then people realized that it was insufficient, because when was the last time you were tolerated? And was it a good feeling? We've been using words like respect and acceptance over the past 30 years or so. What language will be next? What spiritual practices can we activate? How can we use the arts and the sciences to further our goals? I can conclude with this point, as I hope it will be a serviceable segue to the amazing panoply of speakers that we'll now enjoy. Many perils, many promises. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker, Rabbi Edmund Goldberg, will offer reflections on 9/11 and the spiritual challenge it has evoked for the Jewish community and others in the past 20 years, drawing on 3 biblical figures who witnessed horrific events in their time, Noah, Daniel, and Job. He will show that their spiritual journeys still can guide us 20 years after the horror we witnessed. Rabbi Goldberg currently serves as the rabbi of Congregation Beth Shalom of the Woodlands in the Houston area. He has authored several books, including a recent compilation of various ways to evoke the presence of God in our daily lives. Rabbi Goldberg.
Thank you. It's really an honor, a great honor to be here. We all remember where we were 20 years ago on this day. I was teaching at the University of Miami in the Department of Religion, and believe it or not, that morning I was teaching a class on the origins of human violence. As the class began, I believe it was at 9:25, the student said he thought that a second building had been hit by a plane. No one canceled classes at 9:25. Of course, they were the last classes taught for a long time. In any case, I said as the class began, if it turns out this was an act of terror in New York, then what we are learning today will definitely have something to do with why it happened. And I was teaching specifically about why Cain kills Abel. According to ancient rabbinic tradition, many reasons are given, and one is out of religious zealotry. Now, a few years after 9/11, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, one of the perpetrators, was actually testifying, and he said the following. He said he was like George Washington, and then he said that 9/11 was planned by him because killing was part of his job. He says the following: war started with Adam when Cain killed his brother Abel, and it's never going to stop. And I found that such a shocking statement, because here was someone who was a terrible human being, and yet he shared the same discourse that I had been sharing with those students on that very day. Part of the Abrahamic tradition. How sad that we have the same stories, and yet we're so far apart. But it reminds me that religion can be a source of greatness, and it can be, of course, for destruction. Where I was as a rabbi in Coral Gables, Florida, well, we all came together, Christians, Muslims, Jews, and for a few weeks it was tremendous to be there for one another. There were groups of churches and synagogues that never did anything together, but we did then. The next year, the interfaith service on 9/11 was much smaller, but there was one speaker whose words continue to reverberate in my head, especially these days. He had spent a year, he was a priest, he had spent the past year down at Ground Zero, ministering. And something occurred to him during that time, which is, of course, that when we say this terrible day was on 9/11, it's a very American thing to say, because we have 9/11. But of course, in Europe, they do it the opposite way. Or for them, the real way, they say 11/9, right? Well, 11/9 in my calendar is Kristallnacht. November 9th, the day when, for many historians, the Holocaust really began. And at the time when he was trying to say, this priest was, we don't know what's going to happen. It's been a year, but we don't know if this is the end of something or the beginning of something. And I fear that 20 years on, we still don't know. We don't know what it means that we have such terror. And as a country, as a world, we are not as united as we should be. And so I fear that going forward, no one knows what will happen. So we have to still look for the past for ideas. And so I want to share with you briefly today a rabbinic teaching from 2,000 years ago about three who saw destruction. And I found this rabbinic teaching in a sermon that was given by a Reform rabbi 100 years ago, as World War I was ending and the terrible pandemic of the flu was creating so much misery and death. And he wrote about these three biblical characters who saw destruction. Noah saw the destruction of the world through a flood. Daniel saw the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And Job saw the destruction of his family and his home. It's easy these days, sadly, to identify with Noah, not only because of a hurricane that came through here 4 years ago, literally, but also all the terrible floods that continue to plague, not to mention fires, our world today. Of course, Noah was luckier than we might be, because Noah had the rainbow. He had a sign from God that the world would never go through that again. And we don't have that rainbow. We're not going to find it, I fear, if we're not working more together as a country, and perhaps meeting more as diverse religious faiths. If we can identify with Noah, we certainly can also identify with Daniel. Daniel saw the destruction of his sacred space. And in our age, we see all too often religion that is not reflecting the best in us, but the worst in us. Some, of course, don't hurt anyone else. They're just hypocrites. They go to Friday, Saturday, or Sunday services and then ignore what they were being taught the rest of the week. But religion can also be abused in horrific ways. People blaspheme God. They do things in the name of God which are against humanity. Or perhaps they simply try to explain the cruelty of the world as somehow God's plan for us. And I think especially now we religions need to band together to say this is not the God that we believe in. We don't believe in a God that would somehow provide underpinnings for monsters to do their terrible things. All of us represent religions that don't think of God sitting up and deciding the best way to punish us. God in the tragedy is not there. God is in the compassion that we feel for grieved children, parents, spouses, and siblings and friends. God's in the sympathy that we bring. God's in our resolve to apprehend those responsible for heinous deeds. God is in the healing that will come if we are working together. Noah saw the rainbow and could be hopeful. Daniel saw the temple destroyed but also rebuilt. Will we see a world in which false practitioners of our religions are discredited? Will we see a religion as fighting for the humanity that we all share? Will we see religion defending God, who is not causing the suffering, but with us in our suffering? And finally, if we can identify with Noah and Daniel, certainly we can identify with Job. With Job, we've seen people's lives destroyed, especially in this last year and a half, often for no reason. We've seen families torn apart, and we have more questions than answers. We have searched for God, often in vain, in the whirlwind. And yet, unlike Job, God has not visited us with answers. And so Job's questions are what we're left with. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why did God create a world of so much pain and misery? And how can we explain all this injustice and cruelty? We have to live those questions. It's easy to ignore them because most of us don't like to not have answers. I love it when someone asks me a simple rabbinic question and I can give them an answer. It doesn't happen a lot. These three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, they're like us. We've all seen the world flooded with hate. We've seen religion abused and sullied, and we've seen families destroyed. But the lesson that's most relevant is that they saw destruction but also rebuilding, death and rebirth. We await a rebuilding and a rebirth. But we cannot wait for God to start this process. We have to do it ourselves. 20 years ago, we got something right as a country. We talked about that we were united. We're not united now. Let's not wait for another tragedy, another 9/11, to remind us we have to build the bridges of tolerance and understanding now. Now is the time to reach out to others. We can only do it together. You maybe know this very important lesson about ecology. When's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the second best time? Today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Robbie Amirsa is an artist based in Houston, Texas. She came to the U.S. as an undergraduate student from Karachi, Pakistan, and went on to get her MBA from the University of St. Thomas. She has been passionate about art, calligraphy, and Islamic architecture, and sees it as a representation of her interpretation of the divine words of God. Robbie.
It's an honor to be here. This canvas right here, I painted that. It's simply titled One. I came here as was mentioned as an undergraduate student to pursue my degree in economics, and I went on to do my MBA. But my love for calligraphy and art was, I think, started when I was 7 or 8 years old. One of my parents' friends came to visit us from China, and she presented me with this calligraphy in Mandarin of my name on a piece of rice paper. I had never seen something like that before, and it was my most prized treasure. Little did I know that years later, calligraphy would be my calling. An avid traveler, I traveled to the Middle East, Spain, Egypt, Morocco, to name a few. Always hovering around historical sites, museums, art galleries. And my travels took me to the places I had read of in books. The baptism site of Jesus on the east bank of the Jordan River. The spot on Mount Nebo where it is said that Moses was shown the promised land. And you can see the promised land, it's a clear day. And also had the privilege of doing pilgrimage at the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. So as intercultural and interfaith as it gets, right? So fast forward to 2014, a husband, MBA, 3 kids, a dog, blessed life. And that summer, my whole world changed. My mentor, my guide, my go-to guide for everything. My dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer. 6 months at best, that's what the doctor told me. I stood there, I remember vividly just looking at him. And he turned to me very calmly and he said, "Don't be upset, Rabia. They are doctors, limited in their scope according to their education and experience. They are not God. My last breath on this earth will be when he decides." This was his faith, and this is what he taught me. And before he left, he showed me with his own example that you have to keep living each and every day till your last breath. And we are blessed, and so that when we leave this earth, we are just going to be a memory to everyone. Make sure that you are a good memory. Pursue your passion and do what you love to do. It's never too late. There's no right time. The time is now. So here I am today, pursuing my childhood passion. Painting was like medicine for my soul. It was a cathartic experience. I immersed myself in my art, and I felt the physical pain fade away. It's like you entered another dimension without leaving your body. The verses and the words of the Koran, as I interpreted them, then were converted into brushstrokes on canvas. My art is a representation of the divine words of God as I see it. I created this piece a few years ago on a night when I was just sitting and watching TV, and all I could hear was the negativity and finger pointing, and I just had to find my space. I went downstairs, got my paints, started painting. The background, I'm not sure if you can see it clearly from there, it's just very abstract. It represents to me this world, complex, chaotic at times, but full of life, movement, and energy. The symbols of the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, connected with Shalom in Hebrew, Salam in Arabic, and peace in English. Different religions, different scripts, different languages, but one meaning, just one, peace. As an artist and as a strong believer in interfaith harmony, there is power in creating a piece like this to show no matter what our faith or belief, we all strive to seek peace in our lives and in this world, and every religion wants that. After the tragic events of 9/11, we became more divided as a country. Many lost the ability to talk to one another. Some chose fear, what they didn't understand, and others simply chose hate. Many faced a backlash for something they didn't believe or represent, but were victims nonetheless because they were Muslims. So 20 years later, have things changed? Are they any different? Unfortunately, we still see examples of hate crimes and discrimination even today. On one level, we're still living in that unfortunate reality. But definitely, there has been an increased visibility of the Muslim American community. Perhaps as a result of these attacks, it led to a certain amount of education and interest in Muslim Americans and in Islamic beliefs that did not exist before 9/11. So although hate crimes profiling have continued, there has been greater visibility, awareness, and education. education through dialogues and platforms such as the one today, education through organizations such as the Islamic Art Society, of which I am a very proud member. The Islamic Art Society of Houston has worked tirelessly since its inception to promote the rich heritage, beauty, and diversity of Islamic art. By organizing events such as the annual Islamic Arts Festival, we try to build bridges and promote a positive image of our culture and the diverse community amongst all, Muslims and non-Muslims, through the universal language of art. To continue a dialogue about interfaith beliefs as artists and people, we must unlearn to talk about different religions as being so different, and instead appeal to the commonalities that appear in all of us, to promote tolerance and respect. While we all have our different interpretation of God, we use our faith for strength and guidance, for peace of mind and clarity. To continue to break stereotypes and misconceptions, we must learn to talk to one another, to listen, but most importantly, to understand. I personally believe that if you focus on the hurt, you will continue to suffer. But if you focus on the lesson, you will continue to grow. I would like to end with a quote by a famous Hindu mystic, Osho, who says, "Life in itself is a blank canvas. It becomes whatsoever you paint on it. You can paint misery, you can paint bliss. The freedom is in your glory." Thank you.
Thank you, Robbie. Jon Amirsa is a multifaceted artist exploring her soul through the realms of Arabic calligraphy and arabesque patterns, with an integration of archetypal symbolism representing the ever-evolving nature of the transformative qualities of the human spirit. The mesh of art and spiritual experience is very prominent in her work. She believes the power of creativity can transcend all illusion and of duality and ultimately lead us back to understanding true oneness. Sana.
Hi everyone, salam, shalom, peace to you all. Well, it's a pleasure and honor to be here and to witness such oneness in this room right now. Just a little brief on who I am. I'm an artist, and this is one of my pieces here, which I will explain shortly. But I just want to say I don't have much planned, as all the other speakers, but many years ago, 6 years ago, I had a very mystical experience that led me to totally eradicate my sense of identity as a Muslim and become one with everyone in a sense. And being part of a women's interfaith group and speaking with them and being part of the Islamic Art Society and getting to know people of different faiths and backgrounds, I realized I am more like everyone else as a human being, most of all, than anything else. And yeah, we are mirrors of one another. I have a piece that symbolizes two doves that are mirrors to each other. And they're both holding an olive branch. They're giving the olive branch to each other and feeding it. But it shows the mirror reality of how we live in this matrix. We are very simultaneously experiencing what we are within ourselves, in our core beliefs that we hold. So it's very important for us to let go of our separation consciousness, as I call it, and embrace the oneness in all, embrace the commonality in all of us. And that's more difficult than it's, it's more difficult than to practice it. But it allows you to see the one God and the divine in all of us, most of all. And that's something that I've had to cultivate over years of my own experience as being a religious, but more so an artist and spiritual person above all, is to realize that I am just as much you as I am me, and to not decipher myself in any terms of identity. So I would just like to sort of share a brief channel message that came through for me last night regarding this piece. It's called Enter Through the Portal, the Window Portal of Oneness. And it basically has a bunch of angels that are assisting that person on the horse, which we call the Barak. And the Barak is basically a symbolism of your ego, of riding your ego, and which allows you to experience levels of spirituality that nothing else can do. So aside from our religious backgrounds, religious practices, it's more about how we ride our ego and develop and cultivate a sense of mastery above all, that deciphers us as good or bad human beings. So I had the option to put masks on all these angels, but I didn't, to metaphorically show that we need to develop an inner trust and faith more and more, along with all the practical steps we take. That, as a result, will exude out divine protection and make us a match to receiving it. It is about transcending the ego to rise higher than the collective drama and false mask of separation. Know that your reality will change once you've reached a level of mastery within yourself of acceptance, peacefulness, and calmness, and all angelic help will be at your service. Resist the temptation to falter from this, for the key to your heaven solely lies within you. For our realities to shift from separation consciousness to unity consciousness, it is going to be about stepping up to the plate of our soul guidance. Do we hear it calling us to true happiness? And our soul guidance resists the need to control outcomes. It is a meshing and surrender of your will to divine will, to look at the bigger picture unfolding and let go. Travel within the vastness of your own being that wants all that is good and worthy of your divinity to open to you. Transcend the belief that all is not possible. One by one, eradicate the limited beliefs you carry within yourself and have held you back all this time from achieving your full potential as a soul being of pure divine light. That is all that deciphers us as human beings. How much of that light we can hold and express out, for light is pure energy in its very nature, able to cut through all of the confusion and illusions of hatred. So rise up to the occasion of soul mastery and watch the universe conspire to help you in every way possible and perceivably impossible. So that sort of sums up this piece. But yeah, just being part of the Islamic Art Society, I don't know how many of you have gone to one. We actually have one coming up on December 11th and 12th. It's announced that that we're going to have one with the physical, and I hope to see you all there. And just to kind of embrace the spirit of an artist. It's very, it's a very big gift to be an artist, first of all, to be able to witness and see the world through an imaginative lens and to see it through a very openness, most of all. And I think that's where we need to look within ourselves and how open we are to receiving guidance from wherever it comes. So you can get inspiration from anywhere and everyone, and that's the beauty of it. It doesn't have to be someone who's Muslim or Christian. It can be from everyone, and everything can become a symbolism of that. So sort of to embrace the world in that light helps us, to join as one more and more. But that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sani. Robbie Amirsa is a graduate from Jamia Ahmadiyya Canada, 2011. I'm sure I butchered that pretty bad. Since graduating, Mr. Khan has been posted to different cities, serving as a missionary of Islam. Previously serving in Northern Virginia region, Rizwan has been in Houston, Texas since 2017. In his spare time, when not busy with his 3 young children, he enjoys live streaming and answering questions about Islam under the handle Ask an Imam. Mr. Khan has authored books on the subjects of the Muslim prayer and youth-related issues. Moran.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of God, the gracious, the merciful. After September 11, naturally people's attention turned towards Muslims and to the religion of Islam. And the reaction from the Ahmadiyya Muslim community was one that was consistent with the way that we have been working for the last over 100 years of our community's existence, and in the way that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, has taught us to act. And those have to do with 2 areas. One is with our words, and the other is with our actions. Our words are very important because, as was mentioned earlier, that after 9/11 there was a great deal of interest in Islam and a great deal was being said about Islam. So naturally, there was and still is a need for a voice on what it is that Islam teaches, on what the teachings of Islam are. And there the Ahmadiyya Muslim community put before the world a simple methodology to be able to navigate all of the confusion that exists. And that is something that the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community put forward, and which is taught from the beginning of Islam, which is that the Muslim belief, the belief of Islam that the Holy Quran has taught Muslims, is that the Holy Quran is the revelation from God Almighty. This is what makes a Muslim a Muslim. This is why the Quran is a holy book for us as Muslims. And since every single verse, every single word of that book, every syllable is revelation from God Almighty, so any interpretation that forces a contradiction on the Quran is one that is unconstitutional, that is against the Quran. This is a simple common sense principle that we apply to the understanding of any law, of any scripture, of anything. There are many people who very much like to focus on the concept of Sharia law. Even if they approach Islam as a Sharia, as a law, if they apply the same principles that they do to law, to Islam, then it will resolve all of their confusions. When we study United States law, and a simple principle we have is that we cannot make a law, a state law, a federal law. We cannot interpret any law in a way that contradicts the Constitution, that contradicts the principles. Why? Because that would be unconstitutional. So this is a level of respect that we give to a man-made document. A document which is highly respectable and honored, but it was written by human beings. But we as Americans honor that document to such an extent that we would never allow for any law or any interpretation which is unconstitutional, which disrespects the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and which goes against any principle that is mentioned therein. So when we approach Islam and what it is that Islam teaches, what is the true Islam? There's so many interpretations, maybe there is no true Islam, maybe there's no true anything. What we simply explain, and we've been explaining for the last over 100 years as a community, and this is what has been there from the beginning of Islam, is that there's a simple principle that we use with every subject. We shouldn't leave our common sense at the door when we approach religion. But those same principles of reasoning, rationality, logic that apply when we approach another subject of philosophy, even subjects of economic or political policy, anything, they apply to an approach of a religious scripture as well. So when we approach Islam and the Holy Quran with this methodology, then there is no room left whatsoever for any interpretation of Islam that leads to a violent attack on innocent people, that leads to a violent interpretation of jihad. In fact, what you will consistently find among those who put forward violence and terrorism is that their interpretation requires a belief in the principle of abrogation. Abrogation means that in order for us to justify our interpretation, we have to cancel out a certain number of verses of the Holy Quran, because those revelations from God are preventing us from being able to put forward a violent interpretation of Islam. This is what is found consistently among all those who are terrorists and those who are extremists and those who put forward a violent interpretation of Islam. The simple solution to this is a a simple methodology that we have been preaching and putting forward in our interfaith work, in our media work, and everything, which is that as Ahmadi Muslims, and as the precepts of Islam have taught, the basic belief of a Muslim is that the Holy Quran is a perfect book. Beginning to end, it is a revelation from God. This is what a Muslim believes. And if I have to justify my interpretation of the Quran by canceling out words of God because my words are more important than God's, then that means that my interpretation is unconstitutional. It is against the Holy Quran. It is my personal interpretation, but the Holy Quran is against it. The second point after words, because words, as I mentioned, are very important, there's a great need for clarification, and our community strives to be at the forefront of engaging with all those who spread misinformation. We do it here in the United States, and we do it in countries where a person would be persecuted and killed at times for disagreeing. We are at the forefront, and we strive to be at the forefront of removing misinformation. But after that is action as well. And when it comes to action, our community has worked towards humanitarian efforts since the beginning of our inception. But after 9/11, there were particular campaigns and efforts and humanitarian efforts that we launched. One was the Muslims for Life campaign, which is for giving life-giving blood. But on the anniversary of September 11, every year, we have a strong initiative across the country, in all the cities across the country, for gathering blood, donating blood, for encouraging people to come and donate blood at the masjid, not just Muslims, but encouraging all the people in our community. And the goal has been to collect more than 10,000 pints of blood every single year, which is a goal that has resulted in us collecting tens and tens of thousands of pints of blood. The original objective of the campaign was to collect enough blood by which we could save at least as many lives as the lives that were taken on 9/11. Then it became to save at least 10 times as many lives as the lives that were lost on 9/11, and now our objectives have gone far beyond that. So this is part of the actions that we're doing. Another part of our actions is the Muslims for Loyalty campaign, where on the 4th of July each year, we come together and we join in the different parades, we have different activities where we clarify people's misunderstandings and their suspicions about their fellow Muslims, and how Islam has taught loyalty to one's country of residence, how the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, throughout the time he lived under a community that was polytheistic and that was persecuting him and was depriving him of his inalienable human rights. But he never rebelled against that community. He never allowed for anyone to break the laws. But he always was a productive, law-abiding member of the society, even those societies that oppressed his religious freedoms. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, taught that whoso obeys the ruler obeys me, and whoso disobeys the ruler disobeys me. And listen to and obey your ruler, even if you despise him. And the founder of our community, expanding on this, said that obedience to governmental authority is one of Islam's imperatives. And also he said that to entertain ill will against a government under whom life is lived in freedom, and there is complete security and religious obligations can be discharged to the full, is a criminal step and is not jihad. Thus, God Almighty has established me on the principle that sincere obedience and gratitude should be rendered to a benign government, and at that time he was in India, such as the British government. My community and I are bound by this principle. So, along with words, part of the actions of our community, particularly when it comes to 9/11, is to strive to save lives, to undo the damage that unfortunately misguided Muslims have done in the name of Islam, to save far more lives in the name of Islam than anyone can take in the name of Islam. And then also to strive to remove the fear-mongering and misunderstandings by being in the service of our country, being involved in offices and responsibilities of public service and making sacrifices. Even we have a group of our youth who have gone to New Orleans to participate in the humanitarian relief efforts. So to strive to do all of whatever we can as an expression of our patriotism and our loyalty to our country, so that through our actions we can demonstrate, not just through our words, but our actions, that the fears and the apprehensions that people have because of fear-mongering are unfounded, and people of America will find their American Muslim neighbors, God willing, to be the best of neighbors and the best of fellow Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Murray. Sadia Faruqi is a Pakistani-American author, essayist, and interfaith activist. She writes the children's early reader series, Yasmin, and other books for children, including middle grade novels, A Place at the Table, co-written with Laura Chaban, a Sidney Taylor Notable 2021, and 1,000 Questions, a South Asia Book Award Honor 2021. Her new book, Yusuf Azim is Not a Hero, details the experiences of a Muslim child. I see the text got cut off there in the program. But I know that it details the experiences of a Muslim child at the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So, without further ado, Sadia.
You did a great job kind of filling in the blank there. I got a copy of the book because I thought it would be up there, but it's not. So this is my newest book for those of you who don't know who I am. I write a lot, mostly for kids, and I wish there were kids today because I'm so used to talking to kids. I might look at you all like little kindergartners. No, I won't do that. Assalamu alaikum, peace be on you. It feels so great to be back in my interfaith community. I've been an interfaith activist for 20 years. The day after 9/11, I decided that I wanted to do something, especially because I could see what was happening with the Muslim American community, but just overall the hurt that our nation was feeling. I was a new immigrant and I wanted to be a part of the solution instead of, not doing anything. With my mosque and the Muslim community, but then otherwise as well, I've worked with book clubs, newspaper article writing, police trainings, and now children's books. So they kind of seem very diverse in terms of what I'm working on, but the themes are the same, encouraging people to talk to each other, to learn from each other, to share their experiences, to make our communities more welcoming and open to people who might be different from us. And I bring that to my books as well. So we've had some great speakers today. I wanted to do something a little bit different and just talk about this book today because it is release week, so I'm literally very much promoting it. It came out on Tuesday. And I want to talk about what I learned while I was writing this book. So let me tell you who I am. Obviously, like all of you, I've got many identities. Muslim, American, originally from Pakistan, South Asian, immigrant, mom, writer, so many things that we all have multiple identities as part of us. So when we talk about 9/11, we often forget a lot of those multiple identities that people are a part of, and especially any conversation I have seen outside of the interfaith community. So all of you are here because you believe in, hopefully, this mission of bringing people together, but everyone is not like that. So a lot of times when we want to listen to the news, there is a large chunk of conversation missing when we talk about 9/11 or what we've learned or what we've gone through as a nation, which is the Muslim American community. So I know today a lot of us talked about that, but in a lot of spaces and a lot of conversations, that's not mentioned. So hence the book came about. We talk about never forget a lot, but we often forget that there were unintended victims, and there still continue to be. So that's why I wrote this book, to set the record straight, I guess, to talk about what it's like being a Muslim in the U.S. for kids, but also for adults. To me, it's not just history, right? When I talk to kids, so I do this a lot at schools and organizations that serve kids, and the number one comment I get from anybody who's less than 20 years old is, this is history. Let's not talk about it. Or young people often don't connect with 9/11 the way that we do because it's something they read about in their history books or talk about once a year, and that's it. So my job as a writer is to bring that history alive for them in a way that they understand. And then all of you today can help you do my job better by sharing those experiences. You know, if you, if whether you are a Muslim or not, but you can talk to people who are younger people in your lives, whether they're your kids or grandkids, or you might be working at a church where, or any place where there are kids. You can have those conversations. When you talk about 9/11, don't just talk about one part, but talk about all the parts, including the ugly parts, including the parts where those instances where we turned on each other, on our neighbors, and weren't the most welcoming. Because if we don't do that, we can't really, we didn't really learn anything, and we can't move forward. So let me tell you about this book. This boy, his name is Yusuf, and he is an 11-year-old boy. He lives in a small Texas town. Fiction. This is fiction, but I'll tell you why not. Sorry, should have mentioned that. But so Yusuf lives in a small Texas town of Frey, and he's starting middle school. He's super excited about starting this new school. He's going to finally be able to compete in this robotics competition that he has been waiting for since forever. But he notices that things are kind of strange in his town. As the 20th anniversary of 9/11 comes closer, he notices tension, especially amongst the adults. There's a white supremacist group in his town that's kind of riling people up, especially his own Muslim American community, and that spills over into the school as well. So there's kind of some bullying going on in the school, and Yusuf can't really understand because when he sees the banner in his school hallway that says "Never Forget," and he's kind of wondering, what am I not supposed to forget? I wasn't even alive, as anybody else in his age group. So he does two things. One, he starts reading this journal that his uncle wrote when his uncle was his age. So it's a 20-year-old journal that he finds, and it's got journal entries from a boy his age who was watching the 9/11 attacks happen, and then the days and weeks and months after those events, and then how people treated his uncle and his family. And the second thing he does is he starts connecting and find the events that are happening today in his town, and seeing such startling similarities in rhetoric and the words that are used and the ideas that are proposed, and he's starting to understand more about why history is so important, especially for young people to read about. I did the same thing when I was writing this book, because I was much older than these characters when the attacks occurred. So I was in college, I was in my mid-20s, and I didn't really have the right understanding of what it was like to be, say, 11 or 12, and watch your whole world change, and have the adults in your life be just as emotionally destroyed as you, so no one's actually helping you figure things out like they're supposed to. So I actually interviewed many people, Muslim American adults who were in middle school, the same age as Yusuf would be when the attacks occurred. So I sat down with people and I told them, tell me what you went through that day, and tell me how your classmates reacted, and how your teachers reacted, and what happened, the actual physical things that happened that day, and then the days after, and then the weeks after. And using those real accounts, I compiled the journal entry parts of my book. And that will give, hopefully, readers of any age kind of a better understanding of when any of us stood here and said that the Muslim American community was vilified or was treated badly. But what does that mean for somebody who's a kid now? That's kind of just words. But when you read those accounts and you listen to those people, it becomes more real. So before I end, I'm going to actually share a few things that some of my interviewees told me, because it had a deep impact on me. personally as I was writing and researching, and I hope that it will have a deep impact on you, even though it's kind of like preaching to the choir, but maybe not. I think it will make it more realistic for some of us as well. So, these are 4 people that I've chosen for you today. They are adults now, but it'll tell you how old they were when the attacks happened. So this is Carmel. She was in 7th grade in Deltona, Florida. She says, "The days after 9/11 were incredibly scary and lonely. Everyone in class kept looking at me anytime the topic came up as if I had inside knowledge." So there's this understanding that, okay, now this kid who's in class has to suddenly explain, well, why did this happen? What does your religion teach? 7th grader. Maria in 6th grade, she lived in Mansfield, Ohio. "I felt confused as to why I felt embarrassed to be Muslim, since I had never cared before. But now I felt like I had to hide it." Then this is Amani. She was in 7th grade in San Jose, California. She said, "I just put on the hijab a month before. I might as well have put a bullseye on my back. I was grieving and scared like all the other kids because of this thing that's happened." Also, somebody mentioned, right? They were in school that day, and for most of the kids, the TV was wheeled in. I actually had that experience of those kids, those adults telling me that those huge TVs were rolled in on those media carts and they watched. And then these kids who are in these classrooms are being singled out in different ways, not just by other kids, but by adults, the teachers and admin as well. So she says, "I might as well have put a bullseye on my back. I was grieving and scared like every other American kid, but I was also blamed, targeted, bullied by kids and by adults. When you can't walk through the grocery store without a man telling you to go back where you came from, you feel like nowhere is safe." And then the last one, Samira, she was in 7th grade in Long Island, New York. She said, "I remember wanting to fade into the background. If people didn't know I was Muslim, that was good. I wanted to keep it that way." So all of this is not to kind of like have this victim mentality at all. For me, as a writer, this is what I do, right? I explore what people think and feel, and even though I'm writing fiction, I want to include those emotions because readers, you can read this book, or a young person, you will get a better sense because that's how we explore, whether by reading or by watching movies or TV shows, by fiction, we can get a feel of how somebody else feels and walk a mile in their shoes and understand them better, much more than me standing up here and showing you a PowerPoint about, any kind of factual information, because that's the power of storytelling. So I want you all to kind of think about if you have kids in your lives, that you can have these conversations with, not just now, and also don't wait until this one day in September every year, right? These are things that we are facing every day, whether it's airport security or anti-mosque rhetoric, or the ACLU actually records how many mosques are targeted every year in the US, even today, 20 years later. So all of those things should be part of the conversation. This story has all of those things. Yusuf's mosque is being vandalized, and people are trying to block the construction of it, all kinds of nonsense. So, but that's reality for a lot of us. So I hope that I was asked to bring some copies or brochures today. I'd be happy to sign, but regardless of whether you get a book or not, I want you all to know that have these conversations. These conversations are important. They might be difficult and make us uncomfortable because they shed a really ugly light on how we often behaved ourselves with people who were supposed to be our friends or neighbors or people who we worked with or studied with. But it's okay to talk about it, because that's the only way we can do better and change. So thank you for listening.
Because first I'm going to remind people that they have Q&A slips. If you would like to ask a question to one of our speakers, there are pens in the backs of the seats in front of you. And so fill those out and we'll come around and pick those up. Our next speaker, Reverend Frosh, is a senior minister at Cypress Creek Christian Church, is an ordained minister in the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. He served churches in Indiana, Missouri, Florida, and is currently the senior minister at Cypress Creek Christian Church in Spring. Bruce is married to Donna. They have one child, Zachariah, who just moved to Missouri as a first-year student at Culver Stockton College. Bruce has been writing a daily blog entitled Ecclesiological Actions for almost 15 years, where he explores, among other things, the challenges of loving others as Jesus did. Bruce Frosh.
20 years ago was my wife's 40th birthday. You can do the math and know what today is. At the time, she was teaching at a college about an hour and a half from where we were living. She would leave the house before dawn, and that day, 20 years ago, she left wearing the over-the-hill t-shirt with the Grim Reaper on it and a matching coffee mug in hand. We had big plans for that night, but as the day progressed, we talked by phone, and she understood when I said that we would need to change our plans, as there was a prayer gathering that we were putting together for the church. When we finally sat down for her birthday dinner, just the two of us, a little after 9:30 that night, I began to apologize. But she interrupted my apology and said something that was really important for me to hear in that moment. She said, "But I got to turn 40. And so many others will not know their next birthday." For a while, we talked about the events of the day, the emotions felt, but eventually we went to another topic of conversation, for we had just about a month earlier started the process for adoption. And there was plenty to do, a social worker coming to the house to do a study, there was paperwork still to do, we needed to have our fingerprints done, and I really had not thought much about it, but that setting at that restaurant late that night became the setting for some important preparation. The game plan for the next few months was literally spelled out on a napkin. That day was, for so many, an intersection of the unimaginable with the everyday. We found ourselves shocked to the core while also needing to attend to common stuff that did not pause amidst the chaos. A few weeks later, I attended an interfaith luncheon where a colleague of mine, Jim, was the keynote speaker. His words have stayed with me all these 20 years, and I've gone back to them many times, and I've used them just as I am going to today. He talked for a few moments about what happened on September 11th, specifically talking about what had occurred in faith communities that he knew well. People gathering for prayer, an interfaith blood drive, candlelight vigil, and the list went on from there. Those were all wonderful, Jim said, but today I want to talk about what happened not on September 11th, but what happened a few days earlier, the previous weekend, when faith communities across this country gathered for worship and study and meditation and prayer. They most certainly did not think of it in these terms, Jim said, but they were ever so quietly preparing themselves for September 11th. Toward the end of his presentation, Jim said, let us enter every faith gathering, no matter how mundane it might appear, by acknowledging that what happens in such a gathering might be providing us the very tools we need for what today is simply unimaginable. I have shared that story in Jim's words in many different settings over the years, and I have been intrigued by the number of people who either a few days or a few weeks later have contacted me to say how they now look at their faith gathering, their acts of worship, their services of prayer, their times of meditation and reflection. They look at them differently. I guess one small thing that I have learned and continue to take with me and hopefully grow into is trying to recognize how every faith gathering, no matter how small or large, whatever the gathering of spiritual seekers, the curious, the wise, to think of it as a training ground, preparing me for something that I probably cannot imagine. And I pray that this gathering today has been such a gathering for us. Will you join me in a word of prayer? For the wisdom and the grace, for the creativity and beauty, for the thoughtfulness and generosity found within this gathering today, we are thankful. May each of us be forever blessed because of our presence in this space. This is our request, made with faith, hope, and love. Amen. I would like to echo some words that John shared. Thank yous to the people who have offered gifts this day. Your words, the images, the creativity that you have presented. What a gift. I give thanks to, again, everyone that has helped. I want to go give a shout out to Jon Basel. He serves as Center Board. He's also an active member here in our church, and he reached out to me a few months ago and said, "Do you think it might be possible?" And I said, "Sure," and we had a quick meeting, and then I left and went on sabbatical for a while, leaving John to do all the work. And he was willing to do the heavy lifting and make this happen. And so again, John, I'm thankful. And lead the Q&A.
So yes, if you have a question, no doubt, raise your hand and someone will come around and get them from you. Surely there must be a few. Don't make me come after you. We do have somebody raising a hand. There's this one is for Sadia.
Oh.
How do you process the negative remarks from fellow Americans? Where is your refuge?
I mean, faith is definitely, I don't know who I'm talking to, so I guess whoever asked the question, that's a great question. Faith is definitely a huge refuge. I always have my list of prayers that I actually on my phone that I'm reading through. But I feel like this is my mission. I could be the kind who never gets any hate mail because I never write anything that goes out. I could be safe that way. But then I don't feel like I would be contributing to anything on this planet. So I feel that it's my work, my writing, my activism kind of is the refuge itself, because I see also with the negativity, there's also so much positivity. There's so many, especially writing for kids, it is so rewarding because kids will come and they will tell you how much your book meant to them, and their parents will come to you and tell you, thank you for writing this because it helped my kid understand something, or it helped my kid feel less lonely. So I guess people who hate and spread hatred also have their job, but that's my job, and I hope that I can kind of sound them out. Thank you.
This one is addressed to any of the Muslim panelists. Can you explain what Sharia is? Is the Sharia of the Taliban what the Koran teaches?
So Sharia has the meaning of law, and it encompasses all the laws of Islam. For example, the observance of 5 daily prayers is one of the laws in Islam. The observing of fasting is one of the laws of Islam. And the religion of Islam is similar more perhaps to Judaism in the sense that it also gives laws that have to do with the functioning of government, the economy, all these different types of things. So now the question is that those laws that have to do with inheritance, with economics, with government, those types of things, how do they come into application? So there we see that in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, he came to power as a democratically elected person in a majority non-Muslim state. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, came and traveled to Medina as a migrant, and the majority of the people of Medina were non-Muslim. There were 5 tribes, 3 of whom were Jewish, and 2 of whom were idolaters. And many of the 2 idolatrous tribes, they had accepted Islam, but not all of them. So the majority population of this place was non-Muslim. But they came together, their leaders came together and decided that we will make this person as the head of state, of a federal government, which then each of the tribes has its own state autonomy to a degree. So this is the way in which the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, came to be head of state. This is the precedent that we have in Islam. Democracy was there in the beginning. And then also the preserving of people's rights to make their own laws. From the very beginning, the different tribes, the different states within his government, they had their own rights to implement their own Sharia. The Jewish people implemented their own Sharia, their own laws that were found in their own scriptures. And so that was a freedom that was given as well. So the laws that relate to government in Islam from the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, can only be brought into effect through people coming together to agree to the adoption of those laws. And this is how it's always worked. For example, in Islam, it's forbidden to drink alcohol. That's a religious law. I, as a Muslim, don't drink alcohol. It's my choice. But then also, it can be a law that's taken as a government policy. For example, here in the United States, it wasn't just made a state law. It wasn't made a part of the Constitution. It was made an amendment to the Constitution. So that's an example of how through democracy, but people can come together to adopt a law which has to do with the regulating of behavior, with the things that they find harmful. So this is simply how Sharia was brought into effect at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him. But then, of course, as we know that when people lose touch with their base and their origins, then they go towards extremism. Then they impose things. Then they, use dictatorial authority to do things. So now with the Taliban being all over the news, again, the terminologies come back, which is that these are people who are so-called followers of Islam. These are people who are trying to implement the laws of Islam. Here, I wish to remind you that the people of Afghanistan have been Muslims for more than 1,000 years. The people of Syria also have been Muslims for more than 1,000 years. But when do we hear about Sharia and all these things? It's when groups who have come into power as a result of the political turmoil that has been created there, when they then start speaking of Islam, then we act like perhaps this is the true Islam. So groups like ISIS, they never existed in the Middle East or Iraq. They only existed as a result of the complete political chaos that was created there because of wars that happened. Then a group comes along that's a direct reaction to a political extreme situation, and they have a religious extreme interpretation. And then we start wondering that maybe this is true Islam, a true Islam that was never even familiar to these people for the last 1,000 years. And the same thing applies with Afghanistan. These mujahideen, they didn't exist before the invasion of Russia, before complete political turmoil happened there. So a political group that is a product of absolutely a political extreme circumstance then comes to power and then has a religiously extreme interpretation of their religion, it's not surprising at all. The only thing that's surprising is that when we see the product of our own unfortunate, meddling or foreign policies or those things, when we see the chaos that results as a product of those actions then result in extremism, then our thinking that perhaps this is a true representation of Islam, that even people who have been Muslims for 30 generations have never heard of before, that's what's really surprising. So the idea of Sharia is something that we hear here in the United States as a result of these groups, but the concept of Sharia, as has been understood by Muslims for over 1,000 years, which is based on the teachings of the Koran and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him. It's not something that's new that the Taliban just came up with today or ISIS came up with yesterday. It's something that's an established tradition and which is based in the practices of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him.
Thank you, Robbie. Another question for our Muslim panelists. What does the Quran and Muhammad say about women's rights in Islam, and how do they differ from what the Taliban advocate?
I could answer, but since it's related to okay. So the teachings of Islam, obviously, as I just mentioned, they very much differ from the ideology that a politically and religiously extreme organization is going to have. So the principle that Islam teaches is that there are natural differences between men and women that have to be appreciated and acknowledged in order to protect the rights of women. So, for example, we see that when a society becomes completely open and free in its liberation, then it's practically not women and men who are suffering equally. There's a disproportionate degree of suffering. So for example, just a simple example of the epidemic of STDs that we have in our country, which is a direct result of the liberation that's happened, which goes against real, traditional Christian and Muslim values. Here in the United States, so long as we adhere to strong religious values, these issues didn't exist. But when a person leaves religious ideals, then these kinds of diseases become plague-like and normal in society. And the CDC has said that women disproportionately suffer from the complications of these diseases. It's just a simple reality. So this just is an example of how when freedom is left unrestricted, then it's not that we're going to let women do whatever they want to do and now men are scared. But when society is left free without regulations, then unfortunately it's women who suffer. Even right now in the Me Too movement, what we're seeing is that people in segments of society like Hollywood, the most liberal, open-minded people in the world, there we're seeing that when the behavior of men is left unchecked, then what happens? The rampant type of sexist behavior of how women end up suffering. So the principles of Islam are based on a reality. And that reality is that women face vulnerabilities that men never do. And so there has to be rules and regulations in society that prevent women from suffering those disproportionate harms and vulnerabilities that happen in our societies. So what Islam has taught is a sort of equity in this regard. And those are things that don't inhibit the opportunities that women have. A simple example that I'll give of this is the veiling that Islam has taught. The headscarf and the loose outer garment. It's not something that impedes a woman's educational or professional ambitions at all. A woman who's simply wearing a scarf on her head and a loose jacket over her clothes, she's just as free to pursue her educational ambitions, or if she wishes to, her career ambitions. That dress is simply there acknowledging a reality in society that even in this modern era, we unfortunately have not overcome. That when there is statistics in our society that 1 out of 5 women unfortunately experience some sort of sexual assault in their lives, and this is something that is not proportional with men, then when we fail to act, then it's not men and women who suffer equally. It's unfortunately women who suffer more as a ground reality in our society. So Islam has taught different types of precautions which are meant not to impede on the freedom and the rights of women so that they can pursue their ambitions in life to the degree that they desire, but also to put certain safeguards in society so that then men and women can function equally and safely in